Sunday, August 27. Counsels to Christian Wives. Paul begins with a hinge passage, Ephesians 5:21, connecting Ephesians 5:1-20 and Ephesians 5:22-33, in which he advocates for church members to submit to each other. Compare this to Mark 10:42-45. But Jesus called them to himself and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. For whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." And Romans 12, verse 10, "Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, in honour giving preference to one another." And Philippians 2, verses 3 and 4, "Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind. Let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others." Believers are to do so out of reverence for Christ, we read in Ephesians 5:21. The first of several times, Paul will identify the relationship with Christ as the most important and defining one for believers. What does Paul mean by exhorting church members to submit to each other? How are we to understand this idea? Ephesians 5:21. Submitting to one another in the fear of God. Paul also invites Christian wives to submit to your own husbands as to the Lord in the following verse, clarifying that he is discussing the submission of wives to their respective husbands. We'll also look at 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1. "Wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives." And verse 5, "For in this manner in former times the holy women who trusted in God also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands." When Paul says wives are to do so as to the Lord, does he mean a wife is to submit to her husband as though he were Christ? Or instead, does he mean that Christ is the truest and highest focus of her submission? In view of Ephesians 6, verse 7, where slaves are asked to serve as to the Lord and not to men, and Colossians 3:18, where wives are asked to submit to the husbands as is fitting in the Lord, the latter view is to be preferred. Wives are themselves believers who must ultimately honour Christ over their husbands. In both Colossians and Ephesians, Christ and only Christ is identified as the head of the church, which is his body, as we read in Ephesians 1:22 and Ephesians 5:23 and Colossians 1 verse 18. Christ is the head of the church and he is the Saviour of the body, it says in Ephesians 5:23. By analogy, the husband is the head of the wife, with the church's faithfulness to Christ serving as a model for the wife's loyalty to her husband. The passage presumes a loving, caring marriage and not a dysfunctional one. This verse should not be interpreted to allow any form of domestic abuse. And so to finish today, in light of what we've just read, why is this following counsel so important to remember? It comes from Ellen G. White from the Adventist Home, page 117. "If the husband is a coarse, rough, boisterous, egotistical, harsh, and overbearing man, let him never utter the word that the husband is the head of the wife, and that she must submit to him in everything. For he is not the Lord, he is not the husband in the true significance of the term."